Awesome. Thanks, Sam. And thank you, everyone who shared our open mic tonight. Honestly, it's my favorite part of every Thursday night. And tonight, since I was on Welcome Table, I noticed how many new people we had tonight. And that's like probably the most new people we've had in a while. So welcome to all you new faces. We are so happy you guys are all here. And this is actually a great series for you guys to join for your first time because Jesus Changes Everything is kind of the heartbeat of who we are as UCM. As you guys might have noticed on our banners here, we have these three mottos, I guess. Jesus changes everything, you are loved, and your story matters. And we hope that in your short time experience tonight that you really feel that. So yes, we are in a series titled Jesus Changes Everything. And as a community, we truly believe that following Jesus is the most life-changing decision that one can make. In this series, we are inviting a bunch of different guest speakers, which will all be profs that you guys might actually know in some of your classes. They're coming to share their own personal stories of how Jesus radically transformed their lives. And not just their heart, but how it actually impacted their lives and callings and vocations as professors. And so throughout this series, our staff are just going to introduce each talk with a different story of the Bible of how Jesus changed everything for those who encountered him. So very briefly, just to introduce the series. Tonight, I want to introduce to you a woman in the Bible whose life was never the same after just a simple, momentary touch from Jesus. So I'm just going to read quick for you guys, Mark 5:21-34, and we'll read that together if you guys have your Bibles. I won't have slides, but if you guys have the app, that's beautiful too. So Mark 5:21 says, "When Jesus had again crossed over the boat to the other side of the lake, a large crowd gathered around him while he was by the lake. Then one of the synagogue leaders named Jairus came, and when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet. He pleaded earnestly with him, 'My daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so that she will be healed and live.' So Jesus went with him. A large crowd followed and pressed around him, and the woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all that she had. Yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, because she thought, 'If I just touched his clothes, I will be healed.' Immediately her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. At once Jesus realized the power had gone out from him, and he turned around to the crowd and asked, 'Who touched my clothes?' 'You see the people crowding against you?' his disciples asked, 'and yes, you can ask, 'Who touched me?' But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, and trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. He said to her, 'Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering.'" So we see that Jesus is on his way to this man named Jairus' house because there's a crisis going on. But in the midst of his journey towards one crisis, another crisis seems to pop up. We see this woman who had suffered for many years. She's exhausted every means possible to get well, including care under her doctors, which only made her worse. She was desperately in need of a miracle. And I'm sure she thought to herself, if I only just touch Jesus' clothes, I will be healed. And that's exactly what happened. We see that Jesus noticed power come from him and asked who touched him. And of course, the disciples are asking Jesus, like, dude, like there's so many people around you right now. Like you realize how many people are touching you. But then we can see this woman falling on her feet and just tells Jesus everything because Jesus knew that her story mattered, just like we believe that your story matters here. He wanted to connect with her on a deep level, not just give her healing, not just a dine and dash sort of situation. Jesus really wanted to acknowledge her and bring her dignity. Jesus then utters beautiful words to her that she's free and healed from her suffering. And this miraculous story of Jesus literally changed everything in this woman's life. For her, she just knew that she needed to be healed, and she'd probably heard so many stories about this Jesus who has done all these miracles. But I don't think she really fully understood what was actually going to transform in her life when she touched the cloak of Jesus. For her, she only knew she needed physical healing, but what she didn't know was how much one encounter with Jesus would not just change her health, but how it would change everything in her life. And although we only read about a physical healing happening, I believe that a lot more has changed in this woman's life that day. Jesus acknowledged her, and when she would have gone unnoticed in the crowd. She could have gone away. Jesus could have continued to Jairus' house and not even acknowledged her in the crowd, and she would have been fine. But because when we encounter the living God, we cannot walk away unchanged. The things this woman wanted to keep private out of potential shame and fear of condemnation, Jesus actually called out and brought her dignity. This woman would have been probably never the same after that encounter, and I don't believe just physically. I believe from this moment forward, she probably began to live out her vocation and her life in a very different way after this moment. I think this is something that creates a ripple effect when we encounter Jesus. I can only imagine her going to her friends and then her friends going to her friends and just telling about this miraculous miracle of how this man cared for her and heard her story. Bottom line is, Jesus truly changes everything in our lives. Not just our physical well-being or our hearts, but truly every aspect of our life, Jesus holds and changes when we encounter him. And that includes our vocations and our time here at university. And that's exactly what this series is about. Stories of how Jesus changes everything in one small touch. And so I'm just going to pray and then invite Todd up to introduce our guest speaker today. And we're going to hear another story of how Jesus changes everything. So if you'd pray with me. Jesus, I thank you so much that you're a God who brings us dignity, who cares about our story, who doesn't just want to heal us and move on, but you take the time to connect with us and actually call us out in a crowd of so many people, that you care about us all individually. And I just pray tonight as we hear a wonderful story from a prof, that our hearts would be open to hearing what she has to say tonight, and that you would just begin to do a great work in us. We love you, Lord. In your name, amen.
Thanks. Hi, everybody. Those of you who don't know me, my name is Todd. I'm one of the pastors on campus. And Pastor James asked me to introduce our speakers this month because he's away on sabbatical. Oh, he's still here. He's still here. Jesus changes everything, even scientists. So about 10 years ago, the Pew Research Forum in the United States did a longitudinal study of scientists in the States, scientists who are working at universities and research clinics, and it asked them this question: do you believe in God or in a higher power? What do you think the percentage of answers was that was positive, that said yes? Any thoughts? Do you believe in God or a higher power? Yeah, most. Give me a number. I want a hard number. What do you think?
I'd say probably more than
Yep. Any other guesses? 15%. There's a skeptic. It was 50% exactly. So there's this wide prejudice that if you're a scientist, you don't believe in God, you don't have faith. But 50% of top scientists believe in God or a higher power. Which is interesting, something to think about, and we have one of them here today. And I want to introduce Professor Gina Whitaker. I'm not going to say much more about her and let her do that herself, but welcome, Gina, and thank you.
Thank you. All right, yeah. It's an absolute delight and pleasure to be here with all of you today. I'm so thankful to be invited by Todd and James to come and share with you all a little bit about my life and my faith journey. Usually I'm up here on campus sharing about how the body works and how it applies to health. I teach in the School of Health and Exercise Sciences up here on campus. And so I teach a lot of the anatomy and physiology in our department, both first years and then some of the third and fourth year applied physiology. I also teach a little bit about human health promotion and how we can kind of better the lives of the public from a health perspective. I'm actually curious, so I see a couple familiar faces from class, Simone, and I see Kai, and I see Ben, and hands up if you've had me as a prof, or you have me as a prof. Okay, nice. Okay, we've got a few. Well, that's great. It's so nice to kind of see some familiar Christian faces too now, right? It's kind of cool. And maybe you didn't know that part of my life. So it's really fun for me to be able to share that with you. And also some familiar faces from family church life. So it's so nice to see Annette and Stephanie there too. Yeah, this is so great. But anyways, I'm going to share a little bit about myself today, and kind of what makes up the most of my life these days. And then I'm going to take you back to when I was your age, actually, as an undergrad, and how my faith was really formed in those years, and what it was about my time in those ages that formed my faith. And then we're going to go back to my career life and how my faith is continually being shaped by that time as well. So on the screen, I've got my crew here. Oh, I thought this was going to come up in little bits, but I've got my kids, Sophia and Luca. And so Sophia's taller than me for sure. That's me and my husband, Keith, and Luca, who's 10, and Sophia, who's 12. And we're doing kind of one of our favorite winter sports, skiing up at Big White. So this was taken just a few weeks ago, actually. But with our faces, there we are in the summer, this last summer. And so I still can't believe that I have a preteen. Actually, she'll be a teenager. She'll be 13 in like 1 month, which I'm in massive denial about, and just my awesome 10-year-old too there. And then I can't forget about Poppy, our COVID dog. We succumbed to the COVID dog acquisition, and it was actually my daughter, Sophia, who just begged for a dog because she was missing dance at the time and couldn't go to school, and everything was taken away from her. And she's like, I want to care for a dog. So last came Poppy, and she's pretty awesome. So that's our little family. And so as I mentioned, I'm currently an instructor here, and I've been teaching in the School of Health and Exercise Sciences since 2017, and that role has been great in just teaching a whole wealth of students, and like I mentioned, lots of different avenues of health and how the body works. And more recently, I've become the undergraduate coordinator for our department, where I get to walk alongside undergraduate students in their academic journey. And I absolutely love doing that and mentoring students, just hearing a little bit about what they're doing for their from an academic perspective, and what their career thoughts are. And, I like to bounce ideas off of them, and they bounce ideas off of me. And it's just a fun way to get to know students one-on-one, because a lot of my classes are 200 plus. And so when I get to hang with students like Ben in my office earlier today, it's so great to just get to have a little one-on-one time. So yeah, but that's me now. And if I were to go back, 20 years ago, when I was your age, at Simon Fraser University in Vancouver, I was an undergrad in the School of Kinesiology, which is similar to Health and Exercise Sciences and Applied Science. And it was in residence that I actually met Keith in my second year, and I think he was in his third year. And so I met Keith in residence. We were we were in kinesiology together, so we were kind of doing school life together. We were doing res life together. And it's also where I came to learn and become absolutely captivated by this amazing Jesus who changes everything. And that kind of is all intertwined in my meeting Keith and being in res and being exposed to a community of believers that just spurred me on in my faith in incredible ways. So I had a bit of a faith background growing up. I was raised as a Catholic in the Catholic Church, and I actually went to Catholic school in Alberta. That's part of the public school system, which is where I grew up. And so, I had some pretty deep roots actually in terms of my beliefs. I felt, like those beliefs were there for good in terms of believing in God and, knowing the story of Jesus and what he had done for us, and just knowing that no matter what, that was going to be something I believed in my whole life. It was important. It wasn't necessarily a personal walk at the time, and maybe that's just even partly because I was still a child, right? But as I progressed into young adulthood, it kind of became less and less on the forefront of my mind, and more just like, okay, I believe in God, and I know that's important, and I'm sure that it'll come in useful one day or something, right? Wasn't really a big part of my life. And then when I started in residence at SFU and met Keith, I remember walking by his room one day, and I kind of saw it like down the hall, and I looked into his room, and I saw that he had a Bible on his bed. And I remember thinking, Perfect. He's a Catholic. That's a good thing. Back then, I didn't really know that there was anything other than like if a Catholic or not, because I just wasn't educated in that realm. But I thought, okay, like this must be a good sign. Check. I like this guy. So anyways, we got to know each other. We all hung out together as a big group, and eventually Keith and I started dating. And I quickly realized that, faith wasn't necessarily an active part of his life. And if he were to describe it at that day in his age, in that day and age, he'd probably say my faith was the book on the side of my bed, like the Bible on the side of my bed. That was kind of the extent of my faith. But it had been an important thing for him growing up too. And so when we entered into third year, Keith and I both became resident advisors in residence. And with that came a whole wealth of new friends who were also RAs. And it just so happened that a few of these RAs were part of a Bible study group, and they actually went to this church on Saturday evenings. And so for Keith and I both, just with this sort of history of faith on the back burner, we thought, hey, you know what, let's join in. And so that's like, the rest is kind of history in that respect, because it was so quick and easy for me to dive in once I found my little community of believers. I think that this probably isn't working did you do that or did I do that? Oh, you did it? I did it. Okay, perfect. So that's good. That worked out well. It works. So this group of RAs that were meeting together, and it was a little bit of a bigger Bible study group, are here in these pictures. And so there's some pretty old pictures of some of our early days, probably in residence. And we hung out a lot together. We did so much together. And it was really a turning point in my faith, because I was watching and witnessing these others my age choosing to go to church on a Saturday night, like that was their social thing, wanting to get together to read the Bible together, to pray together, and to talk about Jesus and how it applies, how he applies to our life and how we can live out our faith. It was amazing to me. It was an inspiration, and it was something I wanted to be a part of for sure. So we, I jumped in quick. Keith jumped in quick. There's Keith there. There's me. There's Keith and I there. And we had so much fun together. Actually, I think this picture on the bottom was right after this Chad proposed to Carlene. And we were actually all hiding like around the room behind couches. And like, can you imagine like a proposal? Like talk about romantic. Your Bible study crew pops out among the couches to say congratulations after she says yes. So, I mean, you can get a glimpse of how tight our little group was just from, being just kind of growing from those basic roots of meeting together weekly in a community of faith. That social connection was, the fact that we had this common reason for meeting that was our faith. We were well past the small talk in no time. We shared the highest highs and the lowest lows. And, our foundation of faith just provided these deep, deep roots of friendship that have run so deep. And so these pictures were, I had there were no digital, there were probably not really any digital pictures at this point. So literally had to scan these in order to get them on. And then, wrong way. And then, it just continued on for years. We were poor university students. Someone's family had this little kind of trailer at a camping resort in Birch Bay, and we'd go every summer together and just cook together and hang out and be goofy together. And then that continued on over the years. We went to each other's weddings, so that's me and Keith at our wedding and the crew with us. We sung at each other's weddings. We emceed each other's weddings. We planned each other's bachelor parties and bachelorette parties, and it continued on as the years went. Eventually, whoops, sorry guys, I'm going the wrong way here. There we go. Eventually we all started to have kids, and so these groups, as time went by, we weren't always seeing each other in daily life, right? We weren't in university together anymore, but we really committed to getting together at least once a year, and watched our kids grow up over the years. And so they continue to grow here, and so the group just keeps growing, and now, I look at all these kids over the years and just think, oh my goodness, they're like extended family for me, right? I would do anything for these kids. This is actually all the kids this past summer. We went away to Rockridge Canyon for a family camp together and just had an absolute blast. So, we've formed, our lives have formed in our faith, and our kids' lives are forming in their faith, by default and by extension, really, of just being a part of this group. And over the years, we have literally we've seen each other and prayed with each other through the highest highs and the lowest lows. We've walked with each other through parents dying of cancer. We've walked with each other through kids who are born with an imperfection that can be earth-shattering in the moment, right? And more recently, we've walked through a spinal cord injury with one of our dear friends, and she's permanently lost the use of the lower half of her body. And we come together and we cry together and we lament together, and in that we just continue to grow each other or grow together and spur each other on in our faith. So, I was asked to sort of, share a bit about my faith and my background, and even just share a few life lessons as well. So my first spiritual life lesson for you is, no matter where you find yourself, invest in spiritual friendships, which you are already doing, just by default, by being here. But we know, and I heard it in some of these testimonies, that, it can be really lonely in a way following Jesus, because we get busy, we get distracted. There are so many valid distractions in our life, right, that are legitimately keep us busy as students. But before you know it, your faith is on the back burner, and maybe, you'll think, I'll pull it out when I need it. But when you least expect it, and on a daily basis, it can come in very handy on so many levels, right? And so investing in spiritual friendships, really just vital to our spiritual formation, is to have these friendships. And so, keep coming to these groups and to your core groups, because this is how your faith is going to be formed, and you'll be held accountable to it in those years, right? People to support you in through the highs and the lows, the highest of highs and the lowest of lows. Okay, so moving on, I graduated. Obviously, Keith and I got married, and we actually went away right after we graduated. We went to Cape and Ray Bible School in Greece for 3 months. And it was just an interesting time because, we were kind of, in that phase. We'd just gotten married. We'd both just finished with this undergrad in kinesiology. We kind of were thinking about going to medical school. Actually, we were thinking, because we had interviews that same year. And we were kind of asking a question, what's God's will for my life? Typical young adult question who's following Jesus. Or at least in my day it was, how can God use me in my life? And that question was kind of ringing in our hearts and minds as we went along. And sure enough, we got back from Cape and Ray. Keith and I both did not get into medical school. And then actually Keith went on to go and become a pastor. And so that's my husband's job. He's a pastor at a local church in town. And then I was kind of left to decide, okay, well, do I still go the med school route, or do I, I'm not too sure what I want to do. And in the meantime, I ended up going back into a research lab that I had been working in before, and just begin to fall in love with science, actually, the field of science, and really at a very cellular level in terms of how the body works. So cellular science and cell physiology. And so that love brought me to UBC Vancouver, where I ended up doing my PhD in Faculty of Medicine in the field of cellular and physiological sciences, and then went back to SFU to teach in kinesiology after graduating, before coming here into this department. And, in these years, coming off of, this real time in my life of a spiritual high of weekly fellowship with an amazing group of friends, got married, and then went to Cape and Ray and was asking, okay, God, how can you use me? And then I end up in this field of science where how do I follow Jesus in the field of science? This is the question that really all of a sudden I started to ask. Like really, truly, God, what is your purpose for me here? I mean, I was surrounded by many people who not only don't believe in God, but would probably discredit me if they found out what I believed, right? Because it just did, like, from their perspective, faith and science did not mix. So at least in their eyes, in the eyes of unbelieving scientists, the two, they don't really go together. And I kind of have a little side story as to how I think they do. But nonetheless, in these years, I felt at first quite alone in my faith, in this world of science, in this world where really there wasn't really anybody else that I could relate to on a faith level. I still had my church and my Bible study and home life, but spent a lot of time in my grad studies with this other whole group of people that I couldn't share that with in the same way, right? And so it really came to this question of how do I live out my faith? That's coming next. I just went too far forward. I have to throw in a little physiology for you guys tonight, but anyways, in these times, as I reflected on, how do I follow Jesus in this area of darkness, really, where there are people who do not believe and really believe the entire opposite of maybe what I would believe. I had to ask myself, Jesus, where do you have me working in this world, right? How do I live out this life? Live out your will for my life in a way, right? In the field of science. If you take a look at Jesus's life, he gives us a pretty good picture of how we can live out our faith in the darkness, right? I mean, he is a God of compassion and loving kindness and vulnerability and authenticity. And man, oh man, if you start acting in these ways, so showing a loving kindness and a compassion and being vulnerable and authentic with a scientific crowd, it's amazing how transformational it is. It's like light cutting through the darkness. It is a very amazing thing to experience, to be a part of a group where, all it takes is to encourage someone. Hey, you know what? I really thought you did a great job on your presentation in Journal Club today. And it's like, hey, we don't compliment each other around here. That's crazy. What's that all about? It's like we kind of have this facade, but just those simple acts of showing compassion and love and encouraging others, and not feeling like I needed to put on any kind of mask, but I could just be my authentic self, the person that God made me, that I could then just be me. And that was all that it took, is to follow Jesus's lead and be me, right? At our church a few months ago, or I guess it was last month, we were talking about this concept of biblical justice and what that means. And we spent a lot of time in this verse and just talking about how God shows us what is good and what he requires of us: to act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with our God. And so these acts of compassion and loving kindness, this concept of righteousness and biblical justice, it's freeing to just know that that's all that it takes to follow God, that's his will for our life. And so, as an instructor, how I interact with my colleagues, how I interact with my students, showing them compassionate leadership, being a listening ear, having the door open for office hours and say, hey, come on in, and I'm happy to chat anytime. Man, I remember when I was a student, and I started off as an undergrad in science before I went into kinesiology, and I remember going in my first semester to a prof's office hour. He was my chemistry prof, and I went and I was so nervous, and I went into his office and I asked him one question, and it's like he was so angry with me for just asking him the question that I asked. He took his book and slammed it on his desk and didn't even answer my question. And I'll tell you one thing, I never once went to another office hour in the rest of my undergrad. Crazy, okay? And so I don't know. I feel like profs have gotten a little bit nicer over the years, and also UBCO is like it's got a little niche of like some extra nice profs, I think, here, or at least my department. I don't know about yours, but come to HES, come to Health and Exercise Science. It's a good place to be. No, it's okay, but for me to follow Jesus's lead. And show compassion and kindness in my everyday life as an instructor. I mean, it's a no-brainer. It's easy for me. It's how I can be my authentic self. And it just opens the door for people to receive that love that God has for them, one step at a time. So that's my second life lesson. And then lastly, I want to circle back to this concept of science and faith, because it's too bad this isn't coming out. I had my slides animated, but it's okay. It's not coming out. That's all right. Thinking about science and faith and how, in the past, conversations I've been a part of, particularly from scientists, is that you just can't have both, right? But for me, as learning about the body, like it is a worship. It's an act of worship for me, whether students know it or not. Like I'm secretly worshiping God as I'm teaching about the ear, because I'll just give you a little bit of physiology background, because I just find this fascinating. I don't know about you, probably a little bit you do, because we all have bodies, so we can relate, right? But when we're talking about, hearing, we're talking about sound waves traveling in, collecting in this perfect structure of our ear and narrowing down our ear canal. And they're coming in as air waves at a specific frequency and a specific intensity, depending on the pitch and the tone, right? And those air waves come through, and now those frequency of air waves start to hit on a drum, our eardrum, at that given frequency. And so suddenly, all of a sudden, the air waves are going to transfer to this mechanical energy where the drum hits at a given frequency. And we have these tiniest bones of our body through here, all connected, and then they start to vibrate at the same frequency. And then they hit this little door and start to knock on this door to the cochlea, that's the inner ear here, at the same frequency. And that knocking on the door creates fluid waves at that frequency. So now we have these waves. The cochlea is filled with fluid. And these waves at a certain frequency are flowing through the cochlea. And depending on what the pitch is, the frequency, they're going to stop at a certain location of the cochlea. And there's these tiny little cells found in there that have these little finger-like projections that are going to start to bend to the frequency of the sound waves that went from the air to the mechanical vibration to the liquid waves. And now those are going to bend, and that's what's going to tell our brain what we're hearing in terms of the pitch, the intensity, and then we can interpret it from there. So, I look at this and I think this design is like the most artistic, it's a work of art, okay? And so, that's why I say celestial artist was here. Like if God were to paint this picture, he'd probably sign it Alpha, Omega, and be done and be like, I saw that amazing, that I loved that artwork at the beginning, and I was thinking, yeah, like that's such a cool way, an act of worship. And we can even think about, how we can worship just through reflecting on God as the creator, right? And so for me, like when I think of faith and science, they answer two totally different questions. But from my perspective, faith puts the wow in science, because I can go and be like, wow, God, like this is incredible. You are an artist, and I worship you for that, right? And maybe, you might not think about that with respect to the human body. Maybe you will now when you think about hearing and your ear. You might think about that when you're in nature, right? And you look at the trees and you're like, wow, like this is so worshipful for me. Or Okanagan Lake or the ocean. It's majestic. So that brings me to my last spiritual life lesson, which is wherever you find yourself, worship Jesus who changes everything. And when I think about asking that question of what's God's will for my life, this verse became a bit of a life verse for me in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 16-18, which is rejoice always, pray continually, give thanks in all circumstances. I think that just sums up worship, really, right? For this is God's will for you in Christ Jesus. This is all he asks of us, right? It's a life that in some ways is so simple and so pure and so authentic that when we let go and just orient our heart towards this, then our whole perspective, as a student, as an instructor, as a human being in this world, in this day, with everything that's going on, if we orient our heart towards this Jesus who changes everything, our whole perspective changes, right? And, it is a little bit about making time for God, but at the same time, you can choose to join God on his mission, no matter where you are, right? Because he is working among you and in you and through you. And so you can pray and worship him throughout your day, no matter what you're doing. Even when you're teaching a lecture to a whole bunch of 200 first-year ragamuffins and you're trying to get them to learn about the ear. And secretly, I always kind of put this little secret plug-in. So I don't know if any of you noticed it, but when I teach about the ear, I look at it and I'm like, wow, what an amazing design. And I just leave it at that. And that's just kind of my little worship to God. But yeah, so that's all I wanted to share for tonight. And I heard you have a chance to discuss a few things. So I kind of framed it in terms of life lessons, but maybe we could take those and chat about them. Yeah.